Good morning, bon matin from this part of the world. Welcome to the public launch of Foundations for Peace in Turbulent Times, an analysis of Canada's third National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. My name is Katrina Leclerc. I am the chair of the Women, Peace and Security Network Canada, and I am calling in today from Tsawwassen First Nation out in British Columbia. We're very grateful to have you with us. We're very grateful for all of our chapter authors who are also joining us and for other colleagues who will be intervening throughout today's session. We encourage people to introduce themselves using the chat function, including their land acknowledgements, if they wish to do so. The Women, Peace and Security Network Canada, as some of you know, is a network of over 80 Canadian and non-governmental organizations and individuals committed to promoting and monitoring the efforts of the Government of Canada to implement and support the UN Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security. We are a platform, a forum, or providing a forum for exchange and action by Canadian civil society on issues related to women, peace, and security for now over 10 years. We're very excited to be here at the launch of our event, which encompasses the new publication providing analysis, reflections, and recommendations from civil society to actualize and implement the new action plan that has just been launched. This is our 7th edited volume. This publication is actually our largest, so hence why we're even more excited than usual. We are happy to be sharing 12 chapters of different analyses with you, ranging from WPS as a transformative agenda, conflict, displacement, and international humanitarian law, analysis about the situation in Palestine and the perspective of women in Gaza, Veterans Affairs joining us as a new signatory, and so a chapter welcoming back Veterans Affairs Canada to the SINA, the change of military culture and defense culture and men as allies to the WPS agenda. We also have a chapter on youth, peace, and security and the synergies between both frameworks. One on queering peace and security, so the inclusion of 2S LGBTQ+ individuals. We have another chapter on women mediators and their networks. One on humanitarian disarmament, climate and militarism as threats to women, peace, and security. A chapter on the welcome addition of technology-facilitated gender-based violence and cybersecurity in the National Action Plan, which is an addition in this third plan. And finally, a chapter on countering sexual violence and conflict-related sexual violence in the context of the Rohingya genocide. Colleagues, please feel free throughout this event. This is a public event. Feel free to tweet, to share on social media. We will be sharing shortly the link in the chat of the publication. We know this is long awaited by many of you, and we encourage you to use the hashtags CNAP3, so Canadian National Action Plan 3, and hashtag Women, Peace and Security so we can collect and see some of your wonderful tweets. Now, this event is going to be conducted in English, and we do have closed captions, but if you do wish to ask questions through the Q&A function in French, you're more than welcome to do so. Donc, collègues, cet événement se déroulera en anglais malheureusement seulement. Cependant, si vous êtes plus à l'aise en français, on vous encourage d'utiliser le clavardage et la section de questions et réponses ou la fonction de questions et réponses en français et on va pouvoir vous répondre. The agenda for our session is that, of course, I am welcoming you and I'm very happy to do so. We will be having some general remarks. I'll be giving you some updates about the Women, Peace and Security Network and welcoming our colleagues from Global Affairs who will give us a little hello in the beginning. And then we will dive into the meat, the bones of what we are and what we've put together for you with our wonderful panel, moderated by one of our co-editors, Bénédicte Santoire, who will be introducing our panelists and leading us in a Q&A with you as the audience. And then we'll close up our session. But first, we'd like to know a little bit who is in the room and who we have over here. So we are going to launch an audience poll. This audience poll is one of these interactive initiatives that we're trying to put into some of our webinars. And so you should be having shortly a poll pop up with 3 main questions. We'd like to know from you, where are you from? Are you a representative of government? Are you a representative of civil society? Are you inside Canada or outside Canada? And have you participated in what we call the WPS Dialogues FPS in 2022? If you do not know what the dialogues are in 2022, the assumption is that you probably have not participated. But I will let you know what these are in a moment. We're just giving you a second to please answer so that we know who is here with us today. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing with us who is here. We're very excited to welcome you once again. So as you know, or as you may have heard, Canada launched its first National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security in 2011. In 2017, it launched its second National Action Plan, of which we were very privileged to be able to be the lead civil society organization convening civil society to input into the National Action Plan at the time. Now, with this third National Action Plan, which was launched by a joint communiqué from multiple ministers in March of 2024, so just a few months ago, we also were able to lead the process of what we called WPS Dialogues FPS, which was held in the middle of 2022 with support from Global Affairs Canada. And this is what we led as the consultative process. So the dialogue sessions encouraged different civil society leaders, those working on gender, peace and security, and women, peace and security in Canada and abroad, or those who had feedback for us to convene. And so we have issued a report. This was delivered to Ambassador O'Neill, the WPS ambassador in Canada, and her office, who were leading the drafting of the NAP at the time. And so we're very grateful that some of our recommendations have been integrated, and you'll hear more about that from our authors of the chapters today. There are now 10 government departments that are signatories to the National Action Plan, so this third National Action Plan. Each one has an action plan, which we call the department action plans or department implementation plans, with specific additional commitments that fall under their own mandates. So some of our chapters today talk about the larger National Action Plan, but others are diving into the crux of specific action plans from departments themselves. So you'll hear a little bit about both because all of it comes as a package deal from our perspective. And last but not least, of course, in CNAP 2, the second National Action Plan, the WPS Advisory Group was created, which is co-chaired by Global Affairs Canada and our network, the Women, Peace and Security Network Canada. And so we're very happy and welcome that this has continued into the third National Action Plan, and we can continue to co-chair the advisory group with Global Affairs. Now, without further ado, I want to give us as much time as possible to hear from our wonderful authors. I'd like to welcome, however, a short welcome or hello from Mr. Jeff Senior, the Director for Peace Operations Policy and Deployments at Global Affairs Canada. And I do want to share regrets from Jackie O'Neill, our wonderful WPS ambassador, who unfortunately had a family emergency and could not be here with us today. But we're very happy and grateful that, Jeff, you've been able to join us. So over to you, Jeff, for a few hellos.
Well, hi, good morning or good afternoon. I hope you can see and hear me okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to attend today. As you just said, I'm here partly because Ambassador O'Neill was precluded by personal circumstances from attending. She would, of course, normally be here to engage with the network. So that's number one. But secondly, just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Jeff Senior, and I'm the Director of Division in Global Affairs that deals currently with peace operations policy and deployments. That includes our ELSI team, working on the ELSI initiative. But the other reason, in addition to Ambassador O'Neill's circumstances, is that we're undergoing a reorganization here. And come August, I'm anticipating that I'll be inheriting some additional responsibilities. We think that we'll be merging our Women, Peace and Security Policy team, our CNAP 3 implementation team, our ELSI team, into an area of work that'll be part of an expanded division. So I'm fully anticipating working very closely with Simi on CNAP 3 implementation, our WPS policy team, helping to support Jackie O'Neill's office, Ambassador O'Neill, and that's with great pleasure. So this is a great opportunity for me to listen and learn and hear more about the reflections of the network. Simi characterize this as a very formidable network with a substantial brain trust. And as she put it before in a meeting before this, there's lots of criticism and optimism, and both are welcome when it comes to hearing your reflections on the CNAP3. So thank you very much for having me, and I've got my pen and my notebook out, and we'll be very pleased to discuss afterward with Simi and Ambassador Neil some of the reflections that are offered today. Thank you for having me. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and we're very much looking forward to continuing this very close collaboration that we have with the different teams you've already cited to develop a close relationship with yourself. Now, before we move to the formal panel, I'd like to introduce our moderator, or my co-moderator, which is also a co-editor of this publication. So I'd like to welcome Bénédicte Santoire, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Ottawa, focusing on women, peace, and security in Eastern Europe. So Bénédicte is also a steering committee member of the Women, Peace, and Security Network, alongside several of us. So Bénédicte, if you can come on in and add your camera or turn on your camera. Oh, there we go. We see you. And I'm passing the floor over to you to lead us into this next section.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Katrina, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you all virtually today for the launch of our publication. We are pretty excited. Thank you, Katrina, also for giving us a little sneak peek into the very broad range of issues that the publication covers. From the start, we would like to acknowledge that there is one gap in the publication, that we did not receive any submission on Indigenous and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls dynamics with women, peace, and security. But yeah, we thought it was important to acknowledge this, but we invite you to read our network's past publication, which also highlight these very important realities. So as Katrina said, I will be the moderator for this panel, where we will have the chance to hear from 4 authors directly. So let me introduce them to you. Beth Voroniuk is an independent advisor and activist. She has worked with the Equality Fund and provided support to numerous NGOs, UN entities, and government agencies. Beth is also a co-founder of the Women, Peace, and Security Network Canada and currently sits on the steering committee. Now, Dr. Karen Breek and Andrea Siu are co-authors with Laura Sewell of the chapter on Veterans Affairs Canada, the newest CNAP partners. So both Karen and Andrea are members of the Women Veterans Research and Engagement Network. So this network includes and amplifies the voices of women veterans, those conducting research on women veterans, and national advocacy and engagement organizations that support women veterans. So a number of members from this network, including from CAF and RCMP veterans with UN peacekeeping experience, participated in the writing of their chapter. Next, Dr. Sandra Biskupski-Mojanovic is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Waterloo Political Science Department and the Basile School of International Affairs. She holds a PhD in gender studies with a specialization in transitional justice and post-conflict reconstruction from Western University. She does feminist work on security, militarization, and gender inequality. Last but not least, Marisa Consolata Kemper has been living and working in the occupied Palestinian territories in Israel since prior to the 1993 Oslo agreements and regionally in the hopeful days of Middle East White Peace Agreement. In her most recent position as Joint Program Manager for the UN's flagship Rule of Law program, which includes UNDP, UN Women, and UNICEF, Marisa and her team managed grant funding to over 150 CSOs based in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and Israel. Her comprehensive vantage point across the supply and demand sides of governance included the Palestinian judiciary, prosecution, law enforcement, and social protection institutions, and provides unique insights to the issues confounding progress toward resolution of this pernicious conflict. So the first question I would like to ask all four of you in about 3-4 minutes is to share with us, how does your chapter analyze the CNAP tree or department plans? So I would start with Beth, if that is okay with you. Then I would pass the mic to Sandra, then to Marisa, and to finish to Karen and Andrea.
Thanks so much, Benedict, and it's a real honor and pleasure to be here today. I think it's a very exciting moment to share some of the analysis. As Jeff was saying, both the optimism and the criticism. My chapter starts with a quote from the head of UN Women, but I could just as easily have started with another quote from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. At the open debate on women, peace, and security in the Security Council last year, he said, "The world must urgently bridge the gap between rhetoric and reality." He noted that concrete progress is slow, stagnant, or even going backwards. While men lead efforts on peace, justice, and rights around the world, still far too many women's organizations struggle to fund their essential work. As military spending soars, far too many perpetrators of sexual violence walk free, and far too many peace processes exclude women. In both my chapter and in the introduction and the conclusion, we are trying to provide some context on which this National Action Plan was launched, and then also reflect on some of the challenges that this brings. I think the first thing, though, that I'd like to do is highlight, we do acknowledge how much work it is to prepare a National Action Plan. The Canadian National Action Plan is complex with 10 different departments, as was mentioned. We know that getting agreement, negotiating, trying to encourage resources, trying to encourage ambition in this moment is difficult, and we want to applaud those who worked on this plan inside the Government of Canada. But we know that it's also difficult in this particular moment. There are global challenges. We're going to be hearing a little bit about Gaza. We're not seeing the news from Sudan, where there is also a horrific conflict ongoing. The list of other conflicts, Haiti, DRC, is long. And as highlighted in that opening quote from Antonio Guterres, there is real concern about the slow progress on the women, peace, and security agenda. This huge gap between almost 25 years of words and very little action. And here in Canada, I think there's also frustration around some of the delays. This plan was late. It was supposed to come out last year. We are still waiting on the report, the last progress report on the previous National Action Plan. It was due out last September. We haven't seen it yet. And we also have not seen the text of Canada's feminist foreign policy, which was promised in 2020. So we have a really challenging moment for women, peace, and security. And in this moment, some of the questions that activists, academics, and others are asking is around policy coherence. Is the National Action Plan a guiding document? Does it inform major decisions around Canada's foreign policy actions? Activists have often raised issues that aren't in the National Action Plan. The corporate responsibility, Canada's positions on global disarmament. Are we seeing the efforts of, or the ambition of women, peace, and security agenda reflected in these major areas of work? And I think it's something that we're trying very hard as civil society to stress, that the women, peace, and security agenda is not just about getting more women into existing structures. It is a peace agenda, and that is very, very important in this current moment. Thanks, Benedict.
Thanks to you, Beth, for giving us an overview of your chapter. Please, Sandra, go ahead. Your mic is off. Sorry, Sandra.
Oh, no. Okay. For some brief background, which is not in my chapter, but I want to say that I interviewed Canadian servicewomen who deployed on UN peacekeeping operations for my doctoral research, where we also discussed their experiences in the CAF more broadly. This research was motivated by the announcement of the ELSI initiative, a core piece of Canada's women, peace, and security commitments, of course. Many of these women suggested that we need to know more about men's perspectives on gender equality, among other challenges in the CAF, in order to improve the situation for everyone. As such, my current research is with men in the CAF and their perspectives on gender equality, where I've learned that many men, although certainly not all, do not see themselves in gender equality initiatives for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because they think it does not affect them, and many do not necessarily see how restrictive traditional gender norms affect them and everyone in negative ways. Secondly, men may be disengaged because they do not want to take up space where it was dedicated for women, out of benevolence. So I think it's important to include men explicitly in women, peace, and security so that they see their roles in three ways: as perpetrators of insecurity, as victims of insecurity, and so that they are explicitly invited to be allies and actors in pursuing women, peace, and security commitments in a meaningful way. My chapter takes as a starting point the challenges that the CAF has faced over the last few years, including allegations of sexual misconduct against high-ranking CAF leaders, the persistence of racism and discrimination in CAF's ranks, and recruitment and retention challenges resulting in a deficit in the thousands. In the midst of all of this, CAF has established Chief Professional Conduct and Culture to lead efforts to address the harms CAF members have faced through so-called culture change or culture evolution, improving CAF culture to one where everyone feels included and welcome. Part of the challenge of culture change is policy coherence. It's a similar challenge with women, peace, and security. Often, culture change, particularly as a response to sexual misconduct, is framed as a women's issue, and the same goes for women, peace, and security. But we can't do it alone. The CAF, being an overwhelmingly male organization, with women making up approximately 17% of all members, the commitments of culture change and implementing the women, peace, and security agenda cannot be accomplished without the involvement of men. So my piece does a small analysis of policy coherence between CNAP 3, the D&D CAF implementation plan, and the Defense Policy Update, Our North Strong and Free. There is some policy coherence, particularly between the defense policy and CAF's implementation plan, albeit other threats take precedence, including potential threats from Russia and China and the importance of Arctic sovereignty. The D&D CAF implementation plan is the only one of these three documents to name men and masculinity. CNAP 3 does not mention men at all, except that they too can be victims of sexual and gender-based violence. This is a glaring gap, particularly as some implementing departments are so male-dominated. This is my concern and what I discuss more thoroughly in my chapter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I would pass the mic over to you, Marisa.
Okay, thank you very much, Benedict. I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this document. I think, the situation of the women in Gaza is a complicated one, not just because the whole situation is, obviously at war right now, but the restrictions on access to Gaza have really limited the opportunity of actors to go in and bear witness to what is happening there. So I feel very fortunate to have lived there and to have witnessed Gaza in time of, relative peace and hope in the years 1999-2000, and unfortunately the deterioration that has happened since then. So in kind of looking at this piece, I read the Women Peace, the CNAP a little bit diagonally and found it, actually I found it excellent. But the frustration came when you try to overlay, those focus areas and the plan upon the situation in Gaza, I would say for the last 15 years or so, and particularly right now in this devastating situation that we all find ourselves. So my piece, as it is written, kind of addresses the, how do we deal with the situation right now in terms of women, peace, and security, and I put out some ideas which unsurprisingly are really focused on multilateral efforts. I think the engagement at this point, we have to use the resources on the ground to be able to access both the agencies and the civil society players who can help to advance particular components of the agenda in coming in support of women suffering across the board. But it's important to note that like focus areas 1, 2, 5, and 6 are really the building blocks of women, peace, and security that are set up in times of relative stability. And it's very, very difficult to address them or deal with them when you have a situation like we have in Gaza right now. And I mean, just by way of refresher, I mean, area 1, we're talking about building and sustaining peace. Obviously, that doesn't happen when there's an all-out war. Security, justice, and accountability. 5 is leadership and capacity, and I believe 6 is inclusion. So a concept I found very interesting, and I've been back in Canada for about 5 years. We do a fair bit of work with peace and stabilization operations, and peace and stabilization operations speaks frequently of the concept of the drivers of conflict, and I think it's really important to revert to these drivers and really think them through when we're looking at recommendations to support women and to support societies in general in these situations. So it's a consistent focus on the drivers. The only framework that we have here in this situation really is through international institutions and consistent multilateral engagement. I think there are periods of time in the history of the conflict of the Middle East where, and I've worked with many donors from Europe, the Americans and Canada, but there are kind of lulls in the conflict when we look more at containment than actually advancing the peace and stabilization agenda. And I think that sets us up for a difficult circumstance when there is an outbreak of violence again. So for the moment, we're putting, and you can read my piece, I kind of put some ideas around how we can support the different areas, particularly through UNRWA. I mean, UNRWA is you cannot circumvent UNRWA in terms of their ability, their coverage of the territory, their ability to actually operationalize delivery of humanitarian aid, to offer support to women and children, to come in service of people looking for shelter. So UNRWA is an absolutely, it's the backbone of the system in Gaza, as many of you are well aware. And the scare we had over the defunding of UNRWA was really, I think it was a really horrible moment of, possibly catastrophic failure of the international community to be able to support civilians in this particular time. The other, so UNRWA is one. The other multilateral engagement, and I know it well because it was a program that I formerly managed. But the combined efforts of several donors around this rule of law program that's known as SOASIA in the territory, it has incredible capacity because it's unlike most other. I mean, it's very difficult to deal with both the demand and supply side of the rule of law and the kind of social contract, if you like, at the same time. But SOASIA, through its engagement of civil society, women's organizations, human rights defenders, communications groups, Israeli civil society organizations who support and help Palestinians in terms of access issues back and forth from Gaza, these type of things. So their ability to actually subgrant to these organizations is incredibly powerful. Simply because it's a system that's established, the due diligence is in place, and it fosters as well, combined efforts among civil society rather than fracturing and putting civil society groups in competition with each other for funding. So I found it was a very effective mechanism for supporting civil society that way to work with the civilian population in particular. And the supply side, of course, is the side that's delivering the services, particularly in the Palestinian Authority, both, working with the judiciary, working with the prosecution, specialized prosecutions around family violence, supporting women through mediation programs in the Sharia courts, and other aspects of the social protection system in the West Bank. So very, very powerful program right now. I believe, it's funded through the Dutch, the Swedes, a couple other European donors. But it is an important investment, I believe, for Canada to consider. Just in closing, and there's a little bit more detail in my piece, but I think what we're seeing today in terms of what's happening in Gaza, as horrific as it is, it's just the beginning. My social circle, my former colleagues, my friends, my family, who have experienced this, obviously are coming out of it with severe trauma when they're not, either killed or having experienced a physical disability from injuries. So, you combine the kind of, all of these, the levels of trauma, disability, and the economic quagmire that it's going to leave us in, after this the day after, if you like. We speak about reconstruction, but these are populations who have rebuilt multiple times. And just gaining the investment in the private investment in the area to be able to relaunch the economy, I think is it's going to be a huge challenge. So anyway, just in closing, I liked the intergovernmental notion that was put forward in the National Action Plan of Canada, because I think this in particular is it's a conflict that's going to require the kind of engagement across government that can come in support of solutions, and obviously working with like-minded countries. And I would just underscore the importance of engaging countries from the global south, because this fracture line between Western countries and the global south in terms of perception around this conflict, and I work very intensely on the Ukraine conflict as well, more in the defense sphere. It risks really deepening the divide in terms of perceptions and engagement and understanding. So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this panel session.
Thank you so much, Marisa, for your crucial insights and sharing with us your expertise on Gaza. The last authors of this round of question will be Dr. Breek and Andrea Siu from the Women Veterans Research and Engagement Network, who will answer the first question, but who will also touch upon the second question as well that I will ask all of you, which is about the policy recommendations of your chapter. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Benedict. So my name's Karen Breek. I'm a retired medical officer of the Canadian Armed Forces, and I also had the great privilege during my time to be a UN peacekeeper and to also actively be involved in several of the projects that got designed on how to best do medical support for UN peacekeepers, especially UNMOs, United Nations military observers. I wanted to first quickly do some thank yous. I just do a shout out to Marisa. I think already just listening to her, I'm sure we'd all hope to hear more about these kind of topics and learn more from her. That was very powerful to listen to. So I just want to acknowledge and say thank you to her. Some people listening might obviously have noticed that you have some defense and military related people here. We're just one chapter out of 12. Unfortunately, we didn't get all 12 authors to be here. So I just want to again confirm there's 12 chapters, so hopefully please go in and look at the document and look at the wide variety of different discussion points. It is not all about defense and military. We are about much more strategically. For our chapter, it very much was a group effort, and I want to specifically do a shout out for one of our lead authors, which was Laura Sewell, who could not be with us today. She's an international humanitarian consultant and did a lot of the heavy lifting for our document. And we also had the support of the RCMP Women Veteran Council as well, in order to make sure that the RCMP Women Veteran voice, as we actually right now have more RCMP women participating in UN missions than military members. So we tried to get a large group. So I want to thank also everyone that's listening in today. Everyone's busy. You chose to come here today, so it means you care about these topics. Knowing a number of the people listening are from government, you probably were personally involved with CNAP 1, 2, or 3, or your department's implementation plans. So I'm sure you're excited as well to see the growing number of departments, and that you will all eagerly welcome, along with us, Veterans Affairs as the newest department coming into the family and team, helping support our CNAPs. However, at the same time, I'm sure there are people from government and from civil society that are wondering, why Veterans Affairs? So I obviously cannot speak for the department, but again, as someone who personally has done peacekeeping operations and speaks on behalf of a number of other women with those similar kinds of experiences, I can tell you on our behalf, as a military member or an RCMP member, we're happy that VAC is part of this discussion. We see it as a previously missing piece of the puzzle for the women, peace, and security ecosystem, to be able to fully integrate the voices and experiences of the women who are doing the frontline uniformed work in support of this initiative for women, peace, and security. And knowing that Canada tends to be lead in these areas, we have a lot of support and a lot of influence on how to help with gender integration issues of this nature for many other countries as well. So I think our lessons learned are important to capture, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of future Canadian and future other nations. So I will let anyone who's interested in that topic more go to our chapter and read. And we were already going to be now our first speakers to actually give the concrete suggestions in looking at what is a brand new department. And in case you're not aware, Veterans Affairs is the only department that is based not in Ottawa. It is based in PEI. So it isn't as easy necessarily for the senior leadership of VAC to be involved with women, peace, and security ecosystem and meetings and supports and programs that tend to often still be Ottawa-centric. So our two key recommendations are: welcome. It's a start. It is an evergreen document, so let's already get going on where does it go from here. And let's focus on capacity building and relationship building. Capacity building, again, it's a new topic area for a new department. So it will need dedicated resources, dedicated money, dedicated people, and it needs dedicated political will. The entire department will likely need to learn about women, peace, and security. We need some dedicated internal expertise that is actually trained in women, peace, and security, and ideally Ottawa-based, so that they can integrate more to the women, peace, and security different meetings and culture that is available more easy in the Ottawa area. Simple suggestion for a head start is ask for a secondment from another department 1 year to come in to really help come up with an action plan of how to learn more about women, peace, and security, or target specifically and prioritize the hiring transition of military members going into public service on retirement who have also a history of women, peace, and security, so that you can jumpstart your internal knowledge in this area. We need dedicated processes to enable regular, scheduled, meaningful reviews and updates of the implementation plan. And the plan actually needs very clear goals, because how else can we monitor? How else can we decide if we're making progress? One specific example of what could be a goal is there's a new program called the Joint Federal Research Program. And that is between CAF and VAC. I'm not certain if our CMP are looking potentially to join into that sometime in the near future, but right now it seems it's between CAF and VAC, Canadian Armed Forces and Veterans Affairs. And that could prioritize doing a review of the military members and maybe our CMP members who have had injuries and illnesses while doing peace operations and on peace deployment, and then determine what percentage of those women were actually able to successfully achieve VAC benefits or VAC claims, because we're having sometimes a disconnect in our injuries and being able to get it approved still at VAC. The second area is relationship building. Again, it's hard when it's a new topic and the department is based out of PEI. So make a plan. Can you make sure that there are people from the department actually attending meetings on women, peace, and security? And again, especially with D&D CAF, our CMP, Women, Peace, and Security Ambassador's Office. Another lens would be make sure that you're actually having meetings with women, peace, and security focused civil society groups, especially those that do include women veterans, such as the Women, Peace, and Security Network of Canada. I will also comment that there was this week an application that anyone who is a woman veteran who is interested can apply to a brand new council that is being set up called the Women Veterans Council. Deadlines for that is on June 28th, and hopefully there will be this link to Women, Peace, and Security to that council as well. I think that's about it from me, other than, again, to welcome VAC as a new department. And I will pass it over to Andrea for what I have missed.
Thank you, Karen. Those were great opening remarks. What I'd like to add is today, the Parliamentary Committee on Veterans Affairs is tabling a landmark report called Invisible No More, The Experience of Women Veterans. And it's important to note that this is the largest study ever carried out by the committee. And for the first time ever, it documents the lived experience of over 60 women veterans. And this is the landscape that we're talking about. The study recounts their harrowing experiences, the sexual abuse, the abuse of authority, and the discrimination to which they were subjected to during their service. And this includes from over 40 years ago to most recently. They also describe how they struggled to have their physical and mental health injuries recognized when applying to Veterans Affairs for benefits to access the care and support that they need after they leave the service. So why do I raise this? The over 50 recommendations of the Experience of Women Veterans report and the VAC implementation plan are truly linked. They're complementary. And when we're talking about this new environment where VAC is learning about what is women, peace, and security, I think it's really important that the Experience of Women Veterans study and implementation plan are monitored together, that they're implemented together, and the recommendations, the over 50 recommendations are part of this starting point. And that can't do this on their own. They really need to collaborate with outside organizations such as the Women, Peace, and Security Advisory Group for information and insight into women, peace, and security, collaboration with the CAF D&D VAC Steering Advisory Group to ensure an end-to-end process. And as Karen mentioned, the new Women Veterans Council, because that's where the lived experience and advice will come from women veterans. So that's, I really wanted to add that both the implementation plan and the Experience of Women Veterans report are really essential to Veterans Affairs as they move forward in the women, peace, and security environment. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Karen and Andrea. And again, congratulations for this report. The second question now that I would like to ask all the authors is if you could tell us in about 4 or 5 minutes, what are the main policy recommendations coming out of your chapter? So I would first pass the mic to Beth, then Sandra, and then Marisa. And maybe if we have a little bit more time, Karen and Andrea, if they want to add something something else. But first, over to you, Beth.
Great, thanks. I hope people are getting a sense of the range of issues that are covered both in the National Action Plan, but also in this report. You have the very broad, and then you have chapters that are diving into more specific issues. And I think this is one of the challenges. It's one of the strengths and one of the challenges of the National Action Plan is that it covers a lot of territory. I would like to highlight 4 recommendations. The first one that I think civil society sounds a little bit like a broken record, but we keep talking about the importance of policy coherence. And I raised this a little bit earlier, this idea that how can the National Action Plan be inform major policy decisions? How can different policies, programs be consistent across the government of Canada? And this involves strengthening the National Action Plan as a key guiding document, not a niche programming sector that just involves a stream of funding or the ELSI initiative or one set of issues, but this very broad approach. And there are a number of recommendations throughout the report on how to do this. The second recommendation, which is linked to the first, is the need for stronger political support for the National Action Plan. We have recommended, again, and I know this is outside that, what's the phrase? This is above the pay grade of a lot of the government people on this call, because this is aimed at the politicians. We would really like to see political accountability for the National Action Plan. Some of our suggestions include a annual panel with some of the key ministers where they would sit with civil society, present what's happened in the last year, the challenges, the achievements. And we know this happens in countries like the United Kingdom, where the minister actually publicly addresses civil society in terms of progress on the National Action Plan. We'd like to see perhaps an annual day in the Foreign Affairs Committee or the Senate Human Rights Committee on progress in implementing the National Action Plan. We'd like to see more attention when the report is the progress reports are released. How can they have more coverage across government? And hopefully that with the new National Action Plan and the new monitoring and evaluation framework, we'll have reports that come out in a timely fashion and that actually cover and provide a clear narrative on progress. A third recommendation is resources. And this is always, we know, one of the highlights, one of the requirements of a strong National Action Plan is a dedicated budget and resource allocations. This, once again, the Canadian National Action Plan says that it will be carried out with regular resources, which on one hand is good. This is a sign that this will be incorporated in people's day-to-day work, but it makes it very, very difficult to track how money is being spent, if more money is being spent than last time, and that is there an initiative is there a budget for concrete initiatives? We've often spoken of the irony that the major women, peace and security budget for special initiatives in Canada comes from D&D. It's the Mines Research Initiative funding envelope, that we don't have anything comparable to fund research convening on women, peace and security. And the last recommendation, and it's one that builds on what Karen was talking about, it's still the need for ongoing investments in learning and sharing across the government. Given turnover in staff, given the breadth of the issues, it's really important that there is ongoing training, discussions, mentorship, and opportunities for learning. Thanks so much.
Thanks to you, Beth. And I would like to just quickly remind the audience to please use the Q&A function to ask your questions directly to panelists, and I will read them out loud when we reach the general Q&A with you, the audience. But for now, I will pass the mic over to you, Dr. Biskupski-Munjanovic. Again, Sandra, you're
Again, yes, I caught myself. My apologies. Thank you, Benedict. So my recommendations are not as comprehensive and concrete as others, but I can add a few words. So while CNAP 3 is far more intersectional than its previous iterations in many ways, it names diverse women, it names gender diverse people throughout, which is great, but it fails to account for the roles of diverse men. So D&D CAF has been working to implement gender-based analysis plus through an enterprise approach, which from my understanding is a way to further institutionalize GBA plus in the department. However, in order to do this effectively, in a workplace overwhelmingly dominated by men, men need to see themselves in it and not assume that it's only for women or 2S LGBTQI plus folks. How will this be done? It's unclear to me. So D&D CAF's implementation plan also recognizes the importance of naming men, which I mentioned earlier. Their plan states that women, peace, and security includes, and I quote, men and boys active and robust roles in addressing the symptoms of and ultimately contributing to the elimination of gender inequality for everyone. Gender inequality in patriarchal societies also negatively impacts men and boys, particularly through harmful definitions of masculinity. As such, the WPS agenda is a transformative equality agenda benefiting all, end quote. So there's a lot of great language in there. The use of patriarchy, right? Harmful definitions of masculinity. And by naming men explicitly, we're able to hold them to account in women, peace, and security, address their experiences of sexual gender-based violence, and invite them to actively work towards accomplishing WPS commitments because they also have some accountability to do so. So while I appreciate D&D CAF including this paragraph, I want to know more about how they will do this. So I look forward to more action-oriented steps as I follow the progress of CNAP 3. And my recommendation is to include all CAF members in a very explicit way, which is essential for us achieving WPS commitments in such a male-dominated space, which kind of makes D&D CAF unique to other departments. And calling for further mainstreaming of WPS and GBA Plus as prerequisites to meaningful culture change, which is a priority in the CAF now, and I hope it will continue to be a priority into the future. So that's it. Mine are short and sweet. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Marisa, if you would like to come in and give us a bit an overview of some of the policy recommendations that come out of your chapters, briefly, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
I was waiting for the briefly. Yes, no, I'll be very, very brief because I really do think it boils down to two things, and they're not surprising things. The first being engagement, both in Canada and in Palestine, engaging with civil society groups, with women's rights organizations, with human rights defenders on an ongoing basis. The issues are complex and they require that kind of, that kind of conversation that can help to feed and adjust a policy on an ongoing basis. The second piece would really be, and I appreciated that this was in the CNAP, mobilization of like an intergovernmental task force almost. So looking at all of the different agencies who have purview over related issues, GAC, D&D, citizenship, immigration, and really examine how to achieve that policy coherence across all of the different areas, and looking forward into a more peaceful time, obviously. Finally, and it doesn't fit, perfectly in here, but I think it's of extreme importance, is that, Canada does what it can to assure journalistic freedoms, because independent journalism in a situation like Gaza right now, where it's being very much restricted, is not giving us an accurate picture of issues, gender-based violence issues, assault. There's so much of this happening within Gaza, but we need to be able to document that and look to hold perpetrators accountable. So the journalistic freedoms piece, I think, is very important, and I will leave it there. Thank you, Benedict.
Thank you so much, Marisa. Karen and Andrea, would you like to add something else? I know you merged both questions together earlier, but if you have something else to add, we have a few more minutes. And your mic is off. Sorry.
I almost don't want to take anything away from, again, talking about the bigger picture and the strategic issues, because certainly the document and women, peace, and security and the CNAP is not all about military people at all. But of course, that is the topic close to my own heart. One just additional lens to some of this is because GBA, Gender-Based Analysis Plus, is so important and it comes up in all of the discussions. I just wanted to highlight again the importance of SGBA, Sex Gender-Based Analysis, as is used by Health Canada. So when we're talking about humans and their health issues, such as is very specific to D&D as CAF, and then to the people that become veterans, the importance of also including that lens in everything that we do to make sure that the embedded assumptions of being male in a lot of our medical care, medical research, medical supports, medical drugs, medical supplies, to address the systemic bias, we need SGBA. It often doesn't get addressed by only looking at GBA. And that's one area I keep seeing not being understood or addressed when we're looking specifically on the CAF and the VAC side. That's it. A shout out for SGBA at the appropriate time and place. That's my only comment right now, unless Andrea had anything.
No, I don't have any questions. I look forward to the Q&A from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the authors for providing us with a sneak peek of your chapters. I would like now to open to the general Q&A with the audience. I saw some interactions in the chat, so I remind you all to please use the Q&A function or raise your hand to ask your questions directly. I can also read the questions from the Q&A. So the time is now to ask your questions to the authors. Anyone from the audience have a question? We can also merge a few of them together. If not, I do have questions. Okay, so I guess I will ask a first question. Okay, so I guess it's both a question and a reflection on everything that the author said, but I'm just wondering how to ensure that there is sufficient political will, human and material resources to implement the CNAP 3 and track its progress over time when there are so many crises happening at the same time. We know obviously that WPS and several crises do not exist in silo, right? And WPS should especially be mobilized during crises in a cross-cutting way with other policy issues. But we know in practice that this is not always happening. So I guess that would be my question to you authors. I don't know if some of you would like to reflect on that while we wait for more question from the audience.
Thanks. I'm sure other people have things to say, but I can kick off the discussion. I think it's a really important question. And I think that there are a couple of elements. One is on us, those of us all on this call today, in the women, peace, and security community, if that's what we want to call it. I think there is a responsibility on us, how we talk about these issues and how we engage. The framing is really, really important. If this remains this tight little club that you need to understand the jargon and you need to understand all the acronyms and you have to have a PhD to understand, we're not going to get very far. I think what we always need to do is relay how and why these issues are relevant to people's day-to-day work. And that means unpacking, it means making them relevant. It's making whether they're doing disarmament policy or whether they're doing humanitarian assistance, there's different arguments to mobilize. I think that we have to get better at explaining how these issues are relevant to their day-to-day work and bringing them in. I think the other piece, so that's one. I think another one, and Marissa raised it as well, I think we have to strengthen mechanisms to engage civil society and talk to women peace builders, women human rights defenders, LGBTQ rights defenders. We have to have better connections, better understanding of these issues for the people who are working on the front line. So I think there's a lot more that we can and should be doing on this, but I think those are two really important areas. And I can't help but get in when we're talking about women peace builders. We have to increase the resources. We have to actually fund this work. This can't be volunteer work. We have to make sure that there are development assistance resources flowing to women's peace building organizations through bilateral, through multilateral, through whatever, not just small initiatives through the Canadian Fund for Local Initiatives, but fund these organizations. What's the phrase? Fund them like we want them to win. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Beth. I will read right away a question that we have from the audience, and the authors can, of course, bounce back on my question or other questions from the audience. I think this question is mostly to you, Sandra, is from Isadora Roskish from D&D, I believe. So curious how you envision communicating the value of WPS to men who haven't historically been involved in advancing it. A big challenge is not all men see themselves within women, peace and security, and consequently do not see themselves as responsible for it. So how do we approach this? Simply communicating, it doesn't seem to be enough. So this is a question for Sandra, but please, if others in the audience have questions, jump in the Q&A, and we have lots of interaction in the chat.
Thank you for the question. I think that's a really great question. So I think that there's a few ways we can include men in this so that they see themselves. The first is, of course, for leaders to demonstrate the importance of WPS or GBA plus or gender equality more broadly. So to kind of walk the talk. So sometimes from what I'm hearing from my research participants, men in the CAF right now, is emails get sent their way, leadership says a thing, but then they don't actually do anything. So the words are there, but the actions are not there. Secondly, I think it's important to take time for GBA plus. So I know in many of our policies and documents, programs, there's a GBA plus section, and I've heard, and other research has also pointed to the fact that oftentimes this is done in a very superficial way, including copying and pasting, right? So the GBA plus section is just not taken seriously. So perhaps actually breaking down why it is important in every single aspect, right? So sometimes it seems unimportant, but if we really break down the problem at hand, we recognize that there is a gender lens. But the gender lens is often conflated with women. So some problems are not like women's problems, so we just don't think GBA plus is applicable. So that would be my second one. So really taking time for GBA plus, increasing capacity, so folks know how to do it. I don't think they necessarily know how to do it or can open their minds enough to integrate in spaces they think are important. And the third piece to answer that question, I think, is opening up opportunities for conversation. So right now, many of the trainings that D&D CAF members are getting on gender-related matters, let's say WPS, GBA+, and so on, are online. Clicking through all the questions, doing a quick quiz at the end, and just check marking it that they've done it. But beyond that, they don't tend to have opportunities to have meaningful conversations. And so even when there's resistance to including gender in conversations or resistance to culture change, I don't think we can overcome that resistance without having conversations in person where people feel safe to discuss their concerns, discuss what's holding them back from buying in. And of course, with the CAF being stretched already and many members wearing multiple hats, everyone's busy, right? So how do you find the time to have these conversations? And I'm not sure the answer to that, but I know I've heard of leadership hosting like kind of open office hours, just come in and chat with me about anything, right? So breaking down that hierarchical relationship and having opportunities for leaders to converse with members about whatever they choose to. That's one way to do it that I know has worked successfully, but really conversation, making time for it, because I think it's really important. And developing those critical thinking skills will also benefit the CAF in so many other ways, not just with regards to gender. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. So Marisa had her hand raised, and then Karen. Please go ahead, Marisa. Your mic is off.
There we go. I'm piping up because in the last 5 years, I've had an experience that was not in the Middle East. I actually wanted to veer away from the Middle East to not become too jaded. Now I'm back. My background is in governance and human rights law. Working with the Ukrainian military has been fascinating, with the women in the Ukrainian military. And you have, I mean, context is everything, right? I mean, this is a context where women are very eager to engage with the military. Women are wanting to go into combat positions. And of course, there have been considerable losses of men on the Ukrainian side throughout the last 2.5 years of war. I found this really very interesting, actually, and I think it has a lot of implications around the questions that we're addressing here. But you know, the Deputy Minister of Defense summed it up for us in a mission a couple of months ago in a couple of words, and it was basically, you know, this is not a woman's problem, this is a men's problem. And to be able to get at the men's problem, we have to find, identify, and men within the system. And we're very fortunate because we're working with 2 Canadian generals from the CAF who go regularly to work with the Women, Peace and Security work stream of the program, but to engage men, because the men are uncomfortable being engaged directly by the woman. We're getting to the objectives through working with men who have gone through these issues within the Canadian Armed Forces over the last 10 years or so. So I'm very, very hopeful, and I have to say I haven't had a lot of engagement with military people over the course of my career, but these 2 individuals that we're working with right now are truly inspirational and very much supportive of the agenda and capable of pushing it forward. Thank you.
Still piggybacking on that, and again, following Marisa, thank you so much for everything you just said as well. It's making it real. I did just put in a link specifically about the Ukrainian women veterans and some of their challenges, again, because they don't have the same rights and the same benefits for their injuries right now, and are still working hard in that area. So it's a fascinating area to put some light on, and to again, look at ways that Canada can help and support, especially for the women veteran issues. If I can, I just wanted to go back to one point from what Sandra was talking about the importance of gender-based analysis. To me, GBA, when it's done properly, is a gift to the world. It really is something that Canada should be so proud of, and being able to help other countries look at it in this intersectional lens. However, in my lived experience, especially when we're dealing with things that are not sort of the norm, so again, the military culture, the veteran culture, It all becomes about who is doing the analysis and what is their training and what is their knowledge of the culture that they are actually doing the analysis on. And especially in the military, as everyone is aware, recruitment, retention numbers are down. So more and more and more, the gender-based analysis is often done by contractors or people without lived experience. And one of the gaps I consistently see is people are doing their best. They're doing it how they were trained, but there's no quality assurance. There's no lived experience oversight or input. How can we get better if we don't ever learn where the mistakes are, of what intersectionalities we're not aware of, what we're not aware of, and that if we could do more GBA analysis that was allowed to go out to civil society, allowed to go out to veterans with lived experience, that we could quality control them. How else can people learn so that it's a more meaningful GBA, so that it actually matters more? So that QA perspective is, to me, a significant missing link in how we're doing things on that military and veteran side. Thank you.
And I just want to add, I think this discussion on GBA Plus is really important and really interesting because it's often presented as a key tool. And as Karen said, it can be. In addition to the quality, I think there are a couple of other issues that are really important. One is, does anyone ever say your GBA Plus isn't good enough and send it back? Right? Like people can just do it and cut and paste, and so it gets treated like a tick box. So not only do we need the capacities of people doing that analysis, we need to make sure that their bosses know whether or not it's good and whether it meets a certain standard. And Karen had a number of really helpful suggestions on how to do that. And I think the other piece is, then is the analysis used? Because we've seen in a lot of development assistance programming that you have a nice GBA, gender-based analysis plus document, but then it has not changed anything in the design of the initiative. The initiative then doesn't try to narrow the gaps, or it doesn't try to create new opportunities. There's no relationship between the analysis and then changes to the program design to try to address the findings of that analysis. So I think this is an area where it's an important tool, but there's a lot more that needs to be done to make it an effective tool.
Thank you so much, Beth. I read a few questions about veterans in the chat, so I suggest asking a question about veterans and also another question from Katrina that I received, and then we can do like a last round of questions. So how can we engage more with women veterans and understanding their challenges to help inform us of the broad context of the WPS and CNAP agendas? How can this help us inform our work on gender-based violence, but also environmental degradation and its related intersections? And it touches upon chapters in our publication about the intersections between climate, military, and displacement as well. So this would be question more toward veterans for Karen and Andrea, probably. And last question that is more general to you all, authors, is that many countries, including our own Canada, struggle with trust between government and civil society. What do you recommend for mutual trust building in the context of actualizing women, peace, and security? So this is a question from Katrina. So maybe Karen, if you would like to start with the question about veteran women.
Obviously a nice easy one. I know the name of Sunitha, but I can't remember where she works. So when she says, how do we engage? I'm not positive. Is she referring to a specific department, or who is the we? And if no one has that answer, I will assume it still is a government question. So to me, one of the lenses that I keep seeing as I get old, so it's now 35 years of kind of being in this area, I see consistently at the government level, including at wage, including on things like gender-based violence, that the voice of military and military women are always excluded because we're different. We're a different group, and that we are not included, even when we're doing national guidelines on all Canadians. When we say, have you included the military women voice? The answer is no. because you're different. And then even when we're not military and we're veterans, then we should be Canadians then, but we are a different, distinct group with a different level of intimate partner violence and a different workplace trauma from sexual violence. And statistically, we are actually higher risk for a number of different issues, including suicidality, homelessness. We are an identifiable high-risk group that consistently, in my lived experience, is not identified as such or included, even when we're doing the Canadian level things. So we're invisible, hence the report today on invisible veterans. I do encourage everyone who was interested in that topic. It has been a one-year study. It is the longest study done ever on any topic ever in Parliament, and it will be going live by 4 o'clock today. So we're hoping some of these questions will be there. And if I may, I did just see a little bit of a question from Nahid as well. I really think it is important to differentiate how important it is for terminology and for who controls what levers when we talk military spending, military defense, military policies. As the human beings in uniform, we have no control over anything. We are here to serve our country and serve our country's elective officials who decide our policies, who decide what we do and don't do. So anybody who has concerns about military budget, military policy, military, why aren't we peacekeeping? Why are we doing this? That has nothing ever to do with the people actually in uniform. We have zero influence on those topics. We're just the human beings that are saying we're willing to go to the front lines and potentially get injured so that we don't need to have conscription in Canada and have all of you go to the front lines. That's our only issue. So anybody who's concerned with the policies, I please encourage you to bring them up with your MP and your elected MP, because that is the decision-making level that all of those issues come from. So again, differentiate the military budget, policy, equipment procurement from the human beings that are actually in the military. We have no influence on any of those topics. Andrea.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Karen. I just wanted to add to your response back to Sunita. She's a member of the network. I think the new Women Veterans Council will be a real opportunity to engage with women veterans who have lived experience once it's established, and I expect it to be established in early fall. And I think having that new group, it'll be really essential in forming Veterans Affairs, a Women, Peace and Security plan, but also the network on the lived experience.
Thank you so much, Andrea. So I would pass the mic to Beth, Sandra, and Marisa if you would like to bounce back on questions related to mutual trust building between government and civil society. And if you feel courageous, there is also a question in the Q&A about a possible new government administration and what would this entails for women, peace, and security. So we have about 5 minutes left. If you would like to kick off this conversation, Beth.
Thanks. I don't think it takes courage to talk about your question. In the past, women, peace, and security has not been the purview of one government or another. The first National Action Plan was launched under a Conservative government, so I am optimistic and I am hoping that this will continue to be a priority of the government of the day, regardless who is in power. And I get there might be differences in emphasis, but I'm hoping that it will continue to be a strong area of Canadian expertise and global leadership, regardless of who's elected. And the other question on civil society engagement, I think this is a really important topic, as we've mentioned before, and I do think the Women, Peace and Security Advisory Group that Katrina mentioned is worth highlighting again. This is we kind of take it for granted a little bit here in Canada because it's been around for a few years, but it's quite innovative globally. This is an opportunity for civil society representatives, individuals, organizations to sit around the same tables as government officials and talk women, peace, and security issues. It's also co-chaired by the Women, Peace, and Security Network and Global Affairs Canada. So it's not just the government inviting civil society to the table. There's a joint setting of agendas, a possibility to influence, a possibility to ask. We'd like to talk about this issue. Could you ensure that there are some Government of Canada people around the table to do that? Yes, it's not perfect, and there are things that we're talking about next time around. But I think it's a worthwhile mechanism and one that I'm looking forward to seeing how it develops. And I'm sure others have all kinds of other issues as well. So I'll end there because there's so much to talk about on these issues. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Beth. Sandra, would you like to come in with a few comments?
Excuse me, like Beth, I'm less worried about a change in government. I'm more worried about a change in our geopolitical situation and growing instability, growing polarization, and what that will mean as we get closer, sorry, as the world becomes more insecure, priorities will inevitably shift to more kind of hard security issues. I just hope that that doesn't mean that the other issues get dropped, that they continue to be around, understanding that there may be security issues that of course take precedence and take priority as long as those other ones don't drop off. Yeah, I'll defer now to Marissa.
Oh, no, listen, I mean, similar reflections. It's we see where we're heading. It doesn't look that great. You know, and what are the kind of strategies we can use? And I find it particularly fascinating to be sitting between the Middle East and Ukraine, because when these two civil societies, and Beth and I were in a session last week where this encounter happened once again. It's happened to me about 3 times now, where Ukrainian human rights defenders are encountering human rights defenders in the Middle East. And they are having conversations not intermediated by Western countries, and they're conversations of extreme value. They're very, very interesting. They're taking issues on in a different way with a different lens, and perhaps providing elements of solutions in that way. So I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but I think you know, the allusion to the confidence building, having the conversations, I find it extremely rich to be able to exchange with, you know, people like you in government, in civil society, and to just, you know, look at things from multiple angles, because we are living in very complex times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marissa. We are right on time, so I would like to thank you all again so much, all 5 of you, and the audience contributors as well for the interactive chat and Q&A session. I will pass it over to you, Katrina.
Thank you so much, Benedict. If we were in person, I would ask for a round of applause. So maybe a virtual round of applause for all of you and your wonderful contributions and reflections. Thank you so much to the 5 of you and you, Benedict, as well. I also want to give a shout out to all of our chapter authors. We've told you multiple times throughout the last hour that there are 12 chapters. Here you have 4 featured, but there are 12. So I do want to recognize that we have contributions from the Canadian Red Cross, from Tamara Lawrence, from Marissa, of course, you've heard today, from Laura Sewell, who is contributing with our wonderful women veteran representatives here, Karen and Andrea. There's Sandra's piece. There's also a piece that I've co-authored with Shane Wong. There's a piece from Alexandra Bohemier, Sophia Papastrovou, Jillian Fluke, Jessica Kadeski, and Deplina Banerjee. And so we really encourage you to dive into these 12 chapters. They as you have heard, look into a myriad of different topics. They look at the CNAP as a whole. They look at the department-specific action plans. Some of them do a little bit of both, looking at how we can implement this, both from a government perspective, but also how civil society can come as a helping hand, a critical friend, as we like to say. And I'd really like to give a shout out to our co-editors. So Bénédicte Santoire and Beth Baroniuk, thank you so much for leading the way with us and gathering and putting all this time into the co-editing process. I know we've been doing this for a few years now together, so it's really a privilege to be able to collaborate for these edited volumes. And a huge shout out to Monique, who is our wonderful coordinator here at the network. Thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you for keeping us in line. Thank you for all of the tech and other logistical support you bring to the network and even to this event today. I do also want to give a shout out and thanks to our colleagues at Global Affairs who have been instrumental in coordinating with us, especially through the advisory group, but not exclusively through the advisory group, throughout the whole CNAP process, and continue to be committed to collaboration and to hopefully what is continued meaningful collaboration and discussion. I do want to encourage all of you, as I said, to read the publication. We've put the link in the chat. We will be sending it out via email afterwards, and we encourage you also to share it widely within your departments, within your other networks, and on social media. We remind you that we are ourselves on social media, and so if you want to tag the WPS Canada network, we would appreciate that so we can amplify, and using the hashtag CNAP3 and Women, Peace and Security. We also encourage any other government departments, of course, to reach out to any of our authors or to the network so we can facilitate continued collaboration. We recently had, last week actually, a briefing with department officials from Women and Gender Equality Canada, which was very fruitful. And we've had other briefings with different signatory departments. And so we're happy to do so and collaborate closer with each of the departments and welcome this, of course. So just a very big thank you on behalf of the steering committee of the Women, Peace and Security Network. Big thanks to all of you again for taking the time here today. And we look forward to next steps ahead and continued close collaboration. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
So much.